Hello, Bethany Beach Christian Church. I'm Alan Harris, your regional minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ Capital Area Region. What a joy and privilege it is to be with you this morning, even if virtually. And I thank you and your pastor, Rich Plasinski, for inviting me to offer the sermon this day. I also want to thank you all for the good care you once again gave one of your pastors, and mourn alongside you the death of our beloved Reverend Rusty Hesse. Thank you. I don't think it is just because I have so much time to myself during these long COVID-19 stay-at-home days, or just because I'm 57 years old and thinking about retirement, but I have been doing a lot of thinking about my legacy after I'm gone. Maybe it's the fact that my best friend and I were engaged in a deep and honest conversation some months back when we could get together for dinner and drinks. Remember that? And she point blank asked me, "Alan, what do you think my legacy will be after I'm dead and gone?" Nothing makes you take a deep breath like a question such as that from your best friend. Well, we both pondered it a lot and for a while, especially since neither of us have children. But you know, it might very well be Rusty's death at such a young age, and the number of deaths we are hearing about in the last 2 months. In any case, I have been thinking a great deal about what inheritance I will leave behind when I'm gone. Maybe, just maybe, you might be too. It got me to thinking about chatting a few years back with a neighbor on the street where our house is in Cleveland, Ohio. Jim was walking his new dog and I was walking home from church. We met. And even though I had known Jim and his wife Susie for the entire time we had been in Cleveland, and I even officiated at their 25th wedding anniversary recommitment ceremony, I really didn't know Jim very well at all. And there was major parts of Jim's life that were unknown to me. Jim proceeded to take this meeting as an opportunity to share with me one very important moment in his life. Some years before that, Jim had noticed when he woke up a swelling in his gums behind his molars. It didn't hurt at all. It was barely noticeable. So he went on to work. Now his work takes him on the road to visit clients. And while he was visiting with one of his clients, he happened to mention the swelling, which had not gone away as Jim had thought it would. Now, after describing it to the client, who was also a friend, the client got very, very serious and instructed Jim to stop everything and get to the emergency room immediately. Well, Jim thought he was joking and so laughed it off. His friend became quite insistent, and as Jim resisted more and more, his friend physically took Jim's notebook and belongings from him and informed him that he would not let Jim have them back until he had gone to the hospital. They began to exchange words until finally Jim realized that nothing would calm his out-of-control client and friend except going to the hospital. So he decided to quiet him down and go. The first indication that something indeed might be serious about his condition was that once the admitting room nurse heard his condition, Jim was put on a gurney immediately and moved into an emergency room bay without him filling out any of the admission paperwork. When has that happened? Within a few minutes, the entire ER staff was around his bed, and a doctor was examining him intently, and then suddenly declared, "We've got 90 minutes." And Jim asked, 90 minutes until what? Until you die, unless we address this immediately. Well, Jim, like you and I would be, was astonished, shocked, unnerved, you name it. What he didn't know was he had a staph infection. And the general public doesn't understand just how serious staph infections are. But Jim was learning the hard way. Now, the rest of the story is actually what Jim wanted to tell me about. It's about how the doctor, on the spot, gave him a choice. Either to do everything necessary to prepare for surgery and push dangerously close to that 90-minute mark, or to come into his office and have him take care of it with just a little discomfort. Well, as the story goes, Jim opted for the latter. We probably would too. And quickly found out when a sharp blade was literally jabbed into the back of his mouth and the infection vacuumed out, that the doctor was using a euphemism when he said a little discomfort. Besides leaving his fingernail marks in the doctor's office chair and completely shocking a horrified nurse who did not know any of this was going to take place, Jim's story is one of healing, hope, and survival. Jim is alive and well today thanks to the unwavering insistence of a friend. Now, you ask, why on earth would I tell you this story on a beautiful weekend in May? Well, I offer Jim's story because it reminded me of the thin line between life and death, and the necessity for all of us to live lives fully every single minute. As I chatted with Jim on the sidewalk that afternoon, my heart stopped as I imagined what I would do, or what I could do in 90 minutes to bring closure to my entire life. Now, some folks are told by their doctors they have days or weeks or months or years to live, and some folks are gone in an instant. But for some reason, thinking of 90 minutes from now as the end of my life is very, very sobering. Jesus, in his famous farewell speech in the Gospel of John, informed his disciples that the clock was ticking on his own life. And he tells them, therefore, to keep his commandments. I can just hear the disciples say under their breath, which ones? All of them? What about the Torah, the law, the prophets, and the wisdom? All of that we have to keep? But I also recall another conversation that Jesus had with them back in Matthew 22, when he asked his disciples, which is the greatest commandment? And he focused their scattered attention to love. To love God, one another, and self. Just love. But love with your heart and your soul and your mind. Some add strength. Jesus was saying, love with every fiber of your being. When I was a local church pastor, one of the most profound gifts I could be given was the invitation to officiate at the funeral of a loved one. Sometimes they were church members who I knew well and also loved deeply. Sometimes they were family or friends of church members who I may have met often briefly, sometimes not at all. I also had the honor of officiating at the funeral or graveside service of people from the neighborhood who had no community of faith to call home. But in every single instance, I was in awe of the beauty of remembering a life. Now, sometimes we came together to remember a life clearly well lived. But more often than not, we gathered to reflect on a life that was complicated and untidy. But in every case, as is the inexplicable way of love, we came together to honor a life of someone who was loved in some way and by some fashion by someone. With that in mind, I would frequently conclude the service by inviting those gathered to remember a particular aspect of the deceased life which they appreciated or enjoyed. I would invite them to pledge to live more fully their own lives into that facet of who their loved one had been as a way of memorializing them. The finest way to honor someone we love is to be a better person because of having known them and loved them. My friends, in this moment in human history, as unnerving as it is unprecedented, and as we remember those in our church, our lives, our community, our world who have died, and sadly those who yet will die, we will try our best to remember everything we can about them as if in some way we can keep them alive within us by remembering every detail of what they did, what they said, where they went, who they were to us. But you know, the mind is a fickle thing. And forgetting things is as natural to the human mind as is remembering. But we need not worry, because the most important thing about a person's life is not found in the details of who they were. It's found in one thing only. And that's the very same thing Jesus was most concerned about with his disciples. Remembering him when he left. It's the love we leave behind when we're gone. That's what's important. As an adult, I learned this lullaby called Everything is Possible from the magnificent gay a cappella quartet, The Flirtations. But Fred Small had written and sung it prior to them in the early 1980s. The essence of this lullaby is contained in its chorus, and when I hear it, I hear Jesus talking to me, to us. You can be anybody you want to be. You can love whomever you will. You can travel any country where your heart leads, and know I will love you still. You can live by yourself. You can gather friends around. You can choose one special one. And the only measure of your words and your deeds will be the love you leave behind when you're done. The only measure will be the love you leave behind when you're done. You know, the details of our lives are important to us. But to God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, and to our friends and family who really, really matter, the most important thing is simply love. Let us pledge, therefore, this day to remember as much of what we can about Jesus, But first and foremost, let us vow to remember how he loved and to love even more because of it. And surely by doing so, he and we will live forever. May it be so. Amen.